Hello, this is part 1 of 2 of a presentation that shows how you can take an existing Uniface application and add Uniface Flow workflow to it. I'm going to be using the application platform suite sample as the basis for this sample and demonstration, and then I'll follow that with some discussion on some of the advantages of using Uniface 9.4 to integrate these two products. Next, I'll describe some of the workbenches and servers and additional components that are used in Uniface Flow that you'll be able to see in how you test the products working together. Finally, I'll introduce the Uniface Workflow Connector and API, and thus show hopefully how easy it is to integrate the two products together. That is, add Uniface Flow programming to your existing Uniface components to workflow enable them. Each Uniface 9 installation has a samples folder, and one of the samples is the APS or Application Platform Suite sample. One thing you should be sure of though before you attempt to install this sample is that your development license is enabled for all the three products: Uniface, Uniface Flow and Uniface View. The actual instructions are in the APS sample themselves and are fairly easy to follow. There's only one additional step that I'll show shortly. It's good to go through this and also learn a little bit about Uniface View along the way. However, as far as my presentation today is concerned, we won't be using Uniface View beyond mentioning that it's part of this sample. In Uniface Flow, the documentation set actually describes in detail all the integration requirements. It includes the documentation of the API and the workflow connector. If you want to learn a bit more about how Uniface Flow modeling works and all the various parts of the workbenches and business workflows that you can design, have a look at the samples folder in Uniface Flow. My demonstration in part 2 will convert one manual task that's in the APS sample to an interactive web task based on Uniface server page, static server pages. Here's a quick screenshot that shows you what the application platform suite is about. Basically, it describes the 7 steps at the bottom there that you go through. I'll just add that there's one extra instruction involved. After you've completed the normal Uniface installation script for 9.4, you should actually go and manually execute this step. It is called Load Database under Uniface View. This actually loads some essential data that Uniface View requires into the repository. One particular feature of Uniface 9.4 that gives a great advantage to the Uniface and Uniface Flow integration is the fact that there is a single installation for all three APS products. This means there's a single repository. In our case, we'll be using the standard solid database that's installed. There's one instance of Tomcat installed, even though there are multiple applications that use it, and there's one single uRouter used to take requests for all the different components. There's also a new folder structure that reflects this approach. You can see that there's a common folder where all things that are shared between the three products, like the binaries, are all stored, and then there's product specific folders for the types of components and features that are unique to that product. Now I draw your attention to this because older versions of Uniface require extra steps to actually integrate Uniface developed components with Uniface Flow. This involves things like exporting the signatures out of a Uniface development environment and importing them into a Process Studio workbench for Uniface Flow. Also, there's some editing of assignment files required to basically allow various servers to be shared amongst the two products in one business workflow. So really, this leads us to a compelling reason to actually migrate to Uniface 9.4. It certainly makes the development of new business processes much easier. This diagram starts to show some of the relationships between the different aspects and components of the Uniface Flow environment. Obviously, as I mentioned, there's a single repository now in Uniface 9.4 that caters for all three products. You use the UDE for developing components in a normal way, and there's also a process studio that allows you to design business processes and so on, and that also uses the same repository to store data. For Uniface Flow, there is a server console application which allows you to manage various servers. You have to start a business process server manager first, and it in turn manages the workload for one or more actual BPS servers. And there are other servers involved with archiving and batch process execution and so on. On the development side, of course, we're going to be talking about a static server page application. So there's the single Tomcat server there, and the Uniface U server for handling web application requests. In this regard, you'll see that there's also a Uniface Flow component here called a web dashboard, which allows to actually manage and look at the business process itself, as well as initiate the execution of tasks that are web-based. Here's a screenshot of the actual Flow server console. Here we can see that there's one BPS manager running and a single business process server to actually schedule work for a workflow. And here's a screenshot of the dashboard. And you can see that it's using the standard port 8080 for the single Tomcat that's installed, and it allows us to look at various aspects of the business process definitions, as well as actually control the execution of tasks, be they manual or interactive tasks. Briefly, what we'll be doing is working through the sample business process that's used in the APS sample. There is one existing interactive task which we'll have a brief look at, and the demonstration in part 2 will be turning this verified data one into a automated task. We can see here that the URL points to this slightly hidden URL for an operation in the component. And when I talk about the introduction of the actual workflow connector and the API, then you'll see that there's a collection of relatively simple operations to call to actually add to your existing Uniface components and workflow enable them.